This timeline has been created with drawing tools in Microsoft Excel. It is mostly made from this single shape, and does not require any Excel programming skills. Creating this timeline should be reasonably straightforward, if you know how to use shapes in drawing tools, and are comfortable with using Excel formulas and functions, especially the if function. In this example, it has been used for organizing these tasks over a 4-week period. In this first video, I will demonstrate its various features, and then, in the next 3 videos, I will show you how to create this timeline from scratch in Excel 2013. The drawing tools can be found in most, if not all, versions of Excel. So, you should be able to create this timeline even if you are not using Microsoft Excel 2013. As you will see shortly, this timeline is not a static image. It is made up of task anchors, time scale, timeline shape, and intervals. Start date is dynamically linked to time scale and intervals. When it is changed, time scale dates, interval dates, and week numbers are updated accordingly. Currently, the time scale runs from 29th of February to 27th of March. I will now change the start date to 7th of March. As you can see, time scale dates have changed. It now runs from 7th of March to 3rd of April. The dates and week numbers on time intervals have also been updated. Although this timeline runs for a period of 4 weeks, it can be extended further, if necessary. There is really no limit. I am just going to quickly show how it is extended. Just like the main part, this extension is also dynamically linked to the start date. Here is a finished 5-week timeline and a 6-week timeline. These timelines can be resized to fit on a single page, if required. Resizing has no effect on their functionality. New tasks can be added to this timeline in several different ways. A task can be typed directly into a text box, which is joined to an anchor on the timeline by a straight connector. Alternatively, a task can be added first by linking the text box to a cell in the workbook that already contains the task. For example, to add this task from cell B20, I will select the text box. Enter equal sign in the formula bar. Then click on the cell before pressing the return key. This had linked text box to the cell, which I have just cleared, so that the task is added to the text box permanently. After this, task description can be formatted, with options on the Home tab and Format tab. Tasks can also be added from a schedule, either created in Excel, or imported from another application, such as Microsoft Access. To illustrate the process, I will use this sample schedule from a different workbook. This column has full description for tasks, whereas this one has only brief descriptions, in order to use in the timeline. Data from this schedule can be pulled over into Timeline Workbook quite quickly. I will copy this cell with relative reference from this source workbook, and then paste it over into the Timeline Workbook. Select this linked cell, and drag the quick fill handle horizontally. Then select the filled cells, and drag the quick fill handle down. As you can see, the data from schedule has been copied over. This group of active tasks can now be added to the timeline by first creating links between text boxes and the task cells, and then clearing these links to make the task addition to the boxes permanent. Next, I will deal with the set of tasks on standby. Now, I will add the waiting group of tasks to the timeline. Any tasks that are not satisfactorily aligned to the vertical grid lines can be realigned quickly. Select the text box connectors, change their line width to 0. And all selected task connectors will become realigned to the vertical grid lines accurately. Alternatively, if columns width have been formatted to fit gap width between the task anchors, as in this workbook, turn on Snap to Grid. Any task connector can then be easily aligned to its nearest grid line by moving its text box with left or right arrow key on the keyboard. You can continue adding further tasks until the timeline is completely populated. Here is the timeline, fully populated with new tasks. And after task descriptions have been customized. By gradually moving the start date forward, this timeline can be used continuously. For instance, when second week start, delete tasks for the previous week. advance timeline by 1 week, and then rearrange the remaining tasks on the timeline. Now, new tasks can be added for the first week of the next plan. Repeat the process when the third week starts. In this way, the timeline can potentially be used endlessly. Weeks count for intervals can either be displayed as annual week numbers or as required. For example, when 0 is entered into weeks count cell, the count starts from the 1st of January and will continue until the end of the year. But when 1 is entered into this cell, count starts on a date specified in the plan start cell and will continue only until the next plan begins. This is particularly useful when working according to a series of plans of fixed or variable duration. Currently, the plan starts on 29th of February 2016, so the weeks count starts from this date and will continue until the next plan begins. Then, weeks count will be restarted. The current start date is the 14th of March 2016. After the fourth week, weeks count is restarted. Because plan duration is set to 4 weeks. If the duration is changed to 5 weeks, weeks count will restart after the 5th week. Similarly, if the duration is changed to 6 weeks, weeks count will restart after the 6th week. To organize tasks more effectively, this timeline can be used along with an expanded timeline. All types of tasks can be added to this fortnightly timeline, especially those that recur on weekly or fortnightly basis. It can be synchronized with the main timeline. For instance, when 1 is entered into start interval cell, expanded timeline will be synchronized with first and second intervals. To synchronize it with second and third intervals, in the main timeline, enter 2. And for third and fourth intervals, enter 3 into this cell. By changing the start date, this timeline can also be advanced each week, just like the main timeline. How much work will be involved in creating the timeline? Apart from the timeline and its parameters, you will need to create the source data, associated calculations, and linked interval shapes. These will be located on out of view part of your worksheet. Although this quick overview will not give a precise idea, you should be able to make a reasonable guess as to how much work is involved in creating the timeline. In the next 3 videos, I will present a step-by-step guide, which is aimed to help you create the timeline in Microsoft Excel without any difficulty.